Hello, Not Manly here. Welcome back to episode 22 of Kerbal Space Program. We've left our first single stage to orbit craft up in low Eve orbit. We were going to try to return it at the end of the last episode, but we ran out of time, so we're going to try now. First thing we gotta do is lower the periapsis of this craft to 35 kilometers about. We've been using 32 to return craft up from Gilly, but a lot of the parts on this craft are a lot more fragile than the heat shields that we've been using. In fact, those FLT 800 fuel tanks are more heat sensitive than I would have liked, so we're going to try to do as gentle a re-entry as we can. I don't even know where the craft will end up after a successful re-entry, so I just retrograde burn anywhere at this point. Let's see if we can get a good idea of where this thing will end up. Turned out this was done about 90 degrees east of the Kerbal Space Center, so we're taking our chances, seeing where the heck this thing ends up. I'm doing a very, very shallow re-entry, and center of mass is just barely ahead of the center of lift, so we should have enough control over this craft during this descent. I'm using about a 15 degree to 10 degree angle of attack, and I'll use flaps if necessary to keep the nose up. This is going to be a long, slow process, so I've got it going up not only at 4 times regular speed, but I have edited out lots of long, boring bits. So bear with me as we watch this re-entry. It's going to be pretty long. Okay, already those FLT tanks are heating up pretty good. We've got temperature indicators up. I'm going to bring up the thermal details on Kerbal Engineer very shortly once these things get pretty close to critical, so you can see just how much trouble we got into. Looks pretty gentle right here, but that was actually very, very intense because I was worried about those tanks exploding. Eve's atmosphere is nothing to be trifled with, even with Ohio Bob's realistic atmospheres. Look at that. If only we could get tanks that were as strong as those wings, maybe we would worry less about re-entry. There we go, those tanks are getting pretty hot. When did I bring up the thermal details? I know I did it sometime. This is going to be the last Kerbal Space Program for a little while. Something else has come up that'll keep me away from my PC for a while. Here's at a point where I run into a bit of trouble here. Overheating is one thing, but something else that happens when you are slamming into an atmosphere is all this shock heating here is causing a plasma effect that can interfere with radio signals, and I'm seeing my signal strength drop down to slowly nothing until I've got nothing left, and I've got no control over this craft. It seems to know enough to hold course, but Eve's atmosphere is just too thick. I'm moving too fast, and I've already lost avionics, and I've lost one of the canards, and there goes the other canard. Losing our fuel tanks, we're losing our nose cones. Uh-oh. There goes the cockpit, and so on. There we go. 140,000 funds blown up in space. And not too far from the Space Center either. We gotta try this again. So, probe control is not going to be a solution. We're going to need to bring a pilot up there. And I've also gone and replaced that one drogue chute with a pair of Zephyrus turbofan engines to help with the ascent. And we're going to bring up Jebediah Kerman. The steady hand of Jebediah Kerman should help maintain control of this craft during re-entry. With any luck, he'll be able to keep that nose pointed up. But let's see how he does on the ascent here. With those Zephyrus turbofans, they are over 2.5 times as efficient as the Beelzebub engines, but they get 5 times the thrust in the lower atmosphere. So we can use those for the ascent, save a bit of oxidizer, and then when we're going fast enough, then we ignite those Beelzebub turbo ramjets. So hopefully that'll save us some oxidizer, that'll make a return trip a little easier. Something else I found out, we were having trouble trying to pick up speed and maintain level flight at about 10 kilometers up. I ended up leveling off at about 8.5 kilometers up in an attempt to see if we could pick up more speed and grab a little more air until we could get fast enough to climb up to 10. Now we ended up dropping a little bit here and dynamic pressures got dangerously high. Look at that, 87, 90, 91. But shortly after, we started picking up altitude again, even if we had to extend our flaps all the way out to flaps 3 for a little bit. And then once we got well past Mach 1, we picked up enough lift, we were able to start climbing again and start picking up some speed. That was much better than previous attempts. We gotta shut down those Zephyrus turbofans before they overheat. There they go. You'll see an overheat indicator if you try this craft yourself. Otherwise, they'll shut themselves off when it gets too fast and the air gets too thin. Okay, we needed a little more flaps. There we go. I should just adjust it to flaps 30-degree angle there once we get this thing back to the Space Center. But hey, look at that. We're picking up pretty good speed here. Dynamic pressures are still dangerously high at this altitude, but Jeb's got this under control. We've actually got a lot more speed there. There we go. 950, 960. We end up getting to a kilometer per second, a little bit below 19 kilometers. And it was right around then that we started losing our speed, that we just ignite the vectors and go for it. Almost there. There we go. How to do it before we lost too much altitude? Probably 18 kilometers is the ceiling for those Beelzebub engines. We'll have to reconsider our ascent plan. But hey, we were able to get a kilometer per second up there. Not bad at all. And the vectoring of those vector engines will help the nose pointed straight. And there we go. So those turbofans helped out in the lower atmosphere a lot. We used a lot less oxidizer on the ascent. We got a lot more speed. And we got a lot more use out of those vectors. Dynamic pressures got pretty high though. We're still pretty low in the atmosphere, pulling Mach 6.5, and temperature gauges are lighting up across the craft. Hopefully we don't blow anything up. We gotta be careful on this ascent. Finally, dynamic pressures drop down to a manageable level as we get a gorgeous Eve sunrise. There we go, apoapsis just above 60 kilometers. That is all we need. Now, Kerbal Engineer got confused with the Delta V readout, so I put the vectors in their own stage, and now we at least have a reasonably accurate Delta V reading there. But hey, we don't need 300 plus meters per second, we just need 280. Just about time to close the orbit on this much more successful craft. Come on, Jeb, you can do it. And just to make sure I don't go too far off course, I only go half thrust for this. These vectors are very powerful, especially with a nearly empty ship. We got a lot higher thrust to weight up here. There we go. Almost. No, 50, 51. Come on, Jeb. 55, 57, 59. We are in orbit, and with any luck, with a lot more control. We'll let Jeb drop off our test payload, and then we'll try to bring this thing back home safe. There we go. Payload ejection 101. Nose up. Maybe we can do a more elegant payload deployment in our next revision of this craft. Now let's figure out, how are we going to get this aircraft home safe and directly above the Space Center? Can we even do that? Well, as soon as it goes to a map view, maybe I'll be able to explain it. Come on, Jeb, go to the map view. There we go. I put our maneuver about, that looks like about 10 or so degrees east of the Space Center. So periapsis is directly behind that. This re-entry needs to be gentle, so we will basically circle the planet Eve on the way down. With any luck, we'll end up on top of, or at least not too far from, the Space Center. Periapsis 35 kilometers, and here we go again. Angle of attack 10 to 15 degrees, no more than that. This was also a very, very, very long descent. These FLT series fuel tanks are pretty sensitive to heat. A previous attempt at this craft used orange tanks, of all things, to try to use fewer parts, but those orange tanks were even more sensitive to heat than these things, and those were always the first things to blow up. Hopefully we can manage our heat a little better using these FLT series tanks. If we can't do that, we'll try using Mark II tanks. Who knows? If that's what it takes to stay together up on re-entry, then that's what it takes. At least we don't have to worry about signal this time. Jebediah Steady Hands are in firm command of this craft. We've also added a couple of additional 1.25 meter reaction wheels to help maintain attitude. They're pretty close to the center of mass, so we should have good rotational control over this craft. Now we've got the thermal details up there. You can see those FLT 800 tanks are the most heat sensitive components on this craft. If they get over 2000 Kelvin, they explode and Jeb dies in an instant fiery doom. Hopefully we don't do that. That's why we are taking our sweet time on descent. Again, I am clipping out large amounts of this re-entry, even though we're playing 4 times speed. The mission time is just going to be a while. Hopefully I can keep you guys entertained during this very long and treacherous descent. But that's pretty much what happened. It was tens of minutes of this. If one of those tanks got too hot, I would nose down a bit, it would cool off a little bit, and then I would nose back up again. And then it would heat back up again. And I'd go back and forth until we finally got this thing down to about Kerbal orbital speed. There we go, 2200 meters per second. And that was a little more manageable. We're getting some lift now on those wings. We'll kind of be surfing the upper atmosphere right now as we continue to bleed off speed. We're at Mach 8. That should be a little more manageable for these tanks. If you've ever flown a space plane back from low Kerbal orbit, you can get to here. You should be okay. Just continue to maintain control. Don't get cocky, even though we're in a lower speed, lower altitude. The air is going to get very, very thick very, very quickly. We just regained signal and we have regained control of this craft. The worst of the re-entry is over and we are not quite low enough to fire those turbofans back up, but it won't be much longer before we are. There we go. Jebediah Kerman safely bringing this craft back down from low Eve orbit. I think we overshot the Space Center by quite a bit though, so let's just turn this craft around. Slowly, gently. Come on, Jeb, you can do this. And around here we were able to ignite those turbofans and get some extra thrust. We have enough oxidizer left aboard that we can fly this craft for quite some distance, which is good because we've got some distance to cover. Very, very good. We can turn the thermal off. Let's see if we can get a shot of how far away we were from the Space Center. Look at that. What a gorgeous aircraft. What do you think we should call this? I have no idea. This is a very fascinating shape for a spaceplane. Look at that. Oh, looks like we're just outside 100 kilometers or so from the Space Center. So we didn't do too bad. There we go. Oh, we just had it a second ago and I missed it. I'm sure it wasn't too much further than 100 kilometers though. Since we can see the targeting on the screen, it is less than 100 kilometers now. So I am descending slowly and bleeding off speed slowly. Take a look at those opposing elevons. In flight, I enabled spoilers and I set the spoilers to positive in some and negative in others to create this kind of opposing effect that you see here. To help us bleed off some speed without having to do very extreme S-turns. The dynamic pressures are going to be immense. If necessary, we'll use reverse thrust on these turbofan engines. That was another reason for installing the Zephyrus turbofans. They have reverse thrust. If it really is necessary, we can turn that on. As it turns out, this descent proved pretty uneventful. We were able to keep our dynamic pressures below 40. Now, however, comes the most stressful part of this. We thought the re-entry heat was a big thing to watch out for. How about landing? Remember, the gravity is 1.7 times that of Kerbal, and we've got a pretty heavy craft, even empty. Jebediah Kerman triumphantly returning home to the Kerbal Space Center, the first Purple to fly a spaceplane to orbit and back, assuming he can land this thing. That's the big thing I'm worried about at this point. Fortunately, Eve's thick air should help a lot. We've got our landing gear down to help lead off more speed. We've got lights to make sure we don't hit the ground. Come on, Jeb. I turned the brakes off because I want to keep the speed I've got. We'll use our drogue chutes. You see I rearranged the staging a bit. I'll fire the drogues once we are reasonably over the runway. Altitude of this runway is just over 450 meters, so if we can get to within 470, we should be okay. Come on, Jeb. You've got command of this craft. Bring it back on the runway safe. Come on, Jeb. You got this. Look at that. Shaking back and forth here. Very, very thick air. We let the chutes go. Look at that. Look at that. Touchdown. Our first single stage to orbit space plane used on the surface of Eve. The objective of our Kerbal Space Program is practically complete. Now all we gotta do is bring useful payloads up to orbit. Boy, the nose is up on this thing. This thing must be pretty tail heavy at this point. Maybe we can move the wheels back a little bit. Well, let's see. Let's take the gear down and see if we can't straighten this thing out. Look at this very, very heavy craft. Yes, there goes the national anthem. Oh, wobble, wobble, wobble. We're gonna have to fix that with some real struts, I think. Look at that. Up to orbit and back. And we're going to give Jeb the credit for this flight. Look at that, full recovery. We're going to try again next time. Until then, I'm not Manly. Fly safe.